So, as a lot of people already know, and this is not telling tales out of school, Larry Linville as a person, as an actor, besides Frank Burns, was a decent individual, a solid actor, a tremendous talent, and basically was beloved by many. But as Frank Burns, his character he played, one of the most despised, ironic, what do you call, crackpotish, and dangerous characters in comedic, what do you call, medical comedic history. Now, Major Frank Burns, basically Hawkeye described him best in Welcome to Korea. I vouch for the man's character, but he hasn't got any. Now, Major Franklin Delano Marion Burns was the ranking surgeon and second command at the 477 Mass. He was played by, again, the great Robert Duvall in the 1970 film, and Larry Linville throughout the first 5 seasons of the TV series. Now, in the original 1968 novel, Frank Burns was a captain, and though he had no surgical experience, was brash and arrogant, which frequently caused friction with the other surgeons. Duke and later Trapper get into a fistfight with Frank after he blames an orderly for the death of one of his patients. Now, in the 1970 film, Frank was pious, claiming to be a man of God, while blaming others for his own mistakes. The most prominent example was taken directly from the novel when Frank wrongly accuses an orderly named Boone of killing his patient. Boone is crushed, but Trapper John punches Frank in retribution. Now, Frank's portrayal in the TV series was no better. He was very high-strung, hypocritical, snobbish, belligerent, and unfriendly, and those were his good points. Similar to his literary character, he was a self-exalting, third-rate surgeon. He was an elitist and a firm disciplinarian who regularly barked out army regulations at everyone else. But he also proved to be a maladroit and at times even feckless in his duties. His all-around incompetence earned him the nickname Ferret Face, which was given to him by his brother, but first used in a TV series by Trapper John in Season 1. Now, Larry Linville, who played him on TV, described Frank Burns as a man with a mind that stripped its gears. Now, born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Frank is married with 3 daughters. He once mentioned that his family came to America in 1927, though he never said where they came from. At the time of the Korean War, 50 to 53, Frank would have to be at least 40 years old. It was established that he struggled to get through medical school and then was in practice for 12 years. Of course, he paid for his, his marks. This would suggest that Frank himself was an immigrant. Now, Frank's birthday was supposedly June 13th, which is debatable, as he's thrown a birthday party in the winter and for want of a boot. His birth year is never mentioned. Now, of course, the big key points was, of course, his fear of his wife, his affair with Margaret, his affairs with older women, and allegedly Frank also had an ongoing affair with his hometown receptionist. Now, in every incarnation of the character, Frank Burns fancied himself a superior surgeon, but his surgical actions did a little more amplify his ineptitude on many occasions. A patient of his has been spared death only because of a second glance or follow-up action by one of the other surgeons. As such, in order to maintain their stellar 90-80% survival rate, Frank was often relegated to lesser duties. To wit, patients that did not have life-threatening injuries. But even with this, Frank was still prone to making bad calls that did not sit well with the rest of the doctors. Now, the key one, of course, he unjustly accused a corpseman of killing his patient. Trapper subsequently punches him in retribution. Now, in another one, Frank decides to remove a damaged kidney from a patient until Trapper noticed in the x-ray that the patient had only one kidney left. In another episode, Frank decides to go after the appendix of a patient for no particular reason, only have Henry, who was assisting him, say that the appendix Frank was going after was his pinky finger. Now, Franks would admit that he flunked out of medical school twice before finally graduating after paying money for the answers to the exam. In one episode, he claims to have studied 7 years before graduating 120th in his medical class of 200. Now, his key one, of course, was in I'm in Charge Here. His non-surgical duties include sanitary food inspection officer, many episodes about that, garbage detail officer, latrine detail officer, food procurement officer, physical fitness instructor, and lecturer. He gave lengthy, boring, and pointless speeches to enlisted every Friday while the war is being fought. Now, after Henry's discharge, Frank temporarily took over as commandant of the 477. During his brief time in charge, Frank micromanaged camp operations, often barking out orders in contradiction to other people's actions, just for the sake of asserting his command. In Welcome to Korea, when Frank asks Radar if he brushes his teeth, when Radar replies he always does right after breakfast, Frank replies, I want it done before. Now, temporary commander in numerous episodes, Bananas, Crackers, and Nuts, Henry Please Come Home, where Henry was going to Japan, The Trial of Henry Blake, Henry in Love, Officer of the Day, and Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, of course, his obsession with guns as well, and he loved the money. But the key one for me, ladies and gentlemen, is how we ended up off the show. And this led to the famous line, Goodbye, Ferret Face. Now, Frank is crushed when he finds out that Margaret, who Burns was leading on for a number of years and said he was going to marry her, has been engaged to the ever-dapper Lieutenant Colonel Donald Penobscot, and Margaret only exaggerates Frank's already hurt feelings with her incessant praise of her new fiancé in his presence, which for once causes Hawkeye to actually feel sorry for him. After the wedding, which takes place in camp and then a sudden rush of incoming wounded, Frank somberly watches as the newlyweds take off for the honeymoon in Tokyo, and at what would become one of the last lines of the series, quietly says, Bye, Margaret. Now, Hawkeye, BJ, and Potter arrange for Frank to take some Iron Soul, but in Season 6 premiere episode Fade In, he's uncharacteristically late reporting back, and Potter soon gets a series of phone calls for an MP in Seoul telling of Frank's attempts to molest several different blonde women he believed to be Margaret, but he repeatedly evades the MPs until he's finally caught after accosting a general and his wife in a public steam bath. Army brass decide that Frank should be held for psychiatric evaluation and then sent back stateside. Upon hearing that Frank is gone for good, the doctors are ecstatic, with BJ remarking that this reduces the enemy to just North Korea. Potter proposes a toast and now departed Burns, and Hawkeye tries to think of something tender and sentimental to say as a final tribute, but all he can come up with is Goodbye, Ferret Face. And after hockey, BJ, Potter, and Radar share a drink, they all start whooping and throwing papers in the air in celebration. But Frank seems to get the last laugh. Before leaving Korea, he calls the 4077 and tells Hawkeye and BJ, who are packing up his stuff, that not only were the charges dropped, but he's been reassigned to command a VA hospital back in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and also promoted to lieutenant colonel. But given his mental state at the time, it is impossible, even probable, that Frank's story was contrived. The fact that he was given a aggrandizement, should be considered, most notably his phony version of events that led to the Novocaine mutiny. Now, citing his belief that outside of brief moments of comic relief, there was little left that could be done with his character, Larry Linville decided that the fifth season of the series would be his last. As with the Blake-Potter exchange, when the producers and writers scrambled to replace Frank, they decided on a different kind of character to replace Frank. In the season 6 episodes, Fade In, Fade Out, Part 1 and 2, the great David Ogden Steyer joined the cast as Major Charles Evanson Winchester III, an aristocratic Bostonian who, unlike Burns, was an outstanding surgeon. During the last season, Major Hula had some good feelings of her relationship with Burns until she exploded with anger when she found that Frank tried to keep some of her personal properties footlocker, all of which she took back. A ring, an alarm clock, and a picture of her in a swimsuit. Yum, yum. Now, they were leading, some of the writers were leading us astray. They thought Winchester and Houlihan was going to get together, but the rotten bird, the pheasant in the can, kind of destroyed that. Now, the Frankisms on the series as well, it was non sequiturs, like when Hawkeye or Trapper would talk to them. He would give responses like this. One day he said, "Good morning, Frank," and Frank said, "That'll be the day." He had, of course, a penchant for malpropisms, and the best one, of course, talking to Major Houlihan is the same as talking to me, since we're intimate with each other at all times. Now, Larry Linville missed only 4 episodes for the first 5 seasons, including The Moose, For Some Reason, Adam's Ribs, Hawkeye, and The More I See You. Now, a commander on Ken Levine's blog recently recalled how Larry Linville once dealt with criticism that the Frank Burns character was too much of a caricature and unrealistic. Linville had said that whenever he met with groups of veterans who were fans of MASH, he would ask them which character they thought was the most realistic. Invariably, the veterans would choose Frank Burns because they also had that son of a bitch in their outfits. American TV writer Marty Ginsburg was inspired by Major Burns when it came to the character of the Sentinel Prime for the 2007 cartoon Transformers Animated. So whether you think that Frank Burns was a parody, whether Frank Burns was real in a lot of ways, we've all dealt with a Frank Burns in life. In journalism, they're usually 1 in 6 because there's a journalist who thinks he's a journalist, he's not, and you have to correct his photography, correct his text, correct his column, get the facts straight. But it keeps you on your toes because if you work with perfection all the time, you'll never learn. You gotta have at least one asshole in the bunch. And Frank Burns wasn't an asshole; he was just Frank Burns. That's giving a compliment to an asshole. I don't know, like episode per episode, Larry Linville was given different stuff. Sometimes he was cruel, sometimes he was dangerous, especially the Covitas one where he thought that the guy who thought it was Jesus Christ, the guy who thought it was Jesus Christ was a communist, and he called in the Colonel Flag. And I think he was more turned on with Margaret in meeting Flag for another time. So that's the story of the Frank Burns TV version, which came from the books in the movie. Be interesting to see if you would have asked Robert Duvall for a guest spot during the series to get kind of 2 Frank Burns in an episode. So ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you're doing with our MASH podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.